Hey, it's Kyle here, and today I'll be talking about my favorite nonfiction books that I read in 2025. This is one of my favorite annual traditions I do on my channel. I kind of take a look back at the books I read in that year. I do 3 videos, my favorite Star Wars books, my favorite nonfiction books, and my favorite novels. In today's video, I'll be talking about my favorite nonfiction books, and I always like to clarify, these are my 5 favorite nonfiction books that I read for the first time in 2025. I'm not saying these books were published in 2025. Some were, some are much older. It just happened the first time I read them was in 2025. Read a lot of great nonfiction books. I honestly had a hard time narrowing down the list. I went to the last few books, like I would say 4 through 7 in my rankings. I had a hard time figuring out what was going to be the last 2 spots. And honestly, I had a real hard time figuring out number 1 and number 2. I kept on going back and forth which one I wanted to do. But I finally came up with my top 5, and I'm excited to share with them. So I hope you'll enjoy this video. I will say I did a review for all these books individually on my channel. So if you want more details that need those books, just go back, look through my channel. I'll have reviews posted of all these books there. So that out of the way, I hope you'll enjoy this look at my 5 favorite nonfiction books that I read in 2025. Coming at number 5 is Sea People, The Puzzle of Polynesia by Christina Thompson. This is a very interesting book looking at the native people of Polynesia and kind of exploring their history, their background, and how they came to populate one of the most isolated parts of the earth. For much of our more recent history, once Westerners began making contact with the people of Polynesia, there was a great mystery about how this area of the world was settled. The islands are so isolated, so many hundreds of miles apart. How the people of Polynesia settled these remote areas was something that was just a great mystery for not only the Westerners who were coming in contact, but a lot of people, the Polynesians, had some myths about it, but even them, weren't exactly sure how they came to settle this, where they exactly came from, how long they'd been there, that type of stuff. This book kind of explores all that. It's very fascinating. I knew a little bit about the people of Polynesia, but not a whole lot. And I really enjoyed learning more about their culture, the history, and how they settled this extremely challenging part of the earth and thrived there. So I definitely recommend Sea People by Christina Thompson. Number 4 on my list, I'll continue the nautical theme after 5, and that is The Wager, A Tale of Shipwreck, Mutiny, and Murder by David Grann. David Grann is definitely a nonfiction book author that I've enjoyed some of his books in the past. So when I saw this one in the bookstore, I was like, oh, I really like his writing style. Picked up the book, looked at the back cover, so I thought this sounds interesting. I'd actually heard a little bit about the history of this specific shipwreck with the ship The Wager. Weirdly enough, in a YouTube video talking about what had happened, but just need the bare essentials, not a whole lot of detail. Got this book and really enjoyed reading this book. It kind of delves into the entire reason The Wager was finding itself trying to make the passage around South America, how it's connected to a little-known war that's kind of forgot to history between the British and the Spanish, what led to the shipwreck, what people serving in the British Navy at this time period had to go through, what the world was like, and then why the ship wrecked, and what was it like for these people who basically were marooned on one of the most isolated parts in the entire world, how they survived, how they didn't survive, and how a handful of them were eventually able to escape. But the book really boils down to the debate. This crew kind of delves into 2 factions. One backs the captain, and one kind of backs another leader of the ship. And they both have differing philosophies about how the crew can best survive after the shipwreck, and how they can best maybe make their way back to civilization. And the book really sets up as sounding like which side was right and which side is wrong. And one thing I really enjoy about this book a lot, the author does a great job eventually set on the truth, but I think this is true for most situations in the world. There's not one side that was 100% in the right and one side that was 100% in the wrong. Both had some good points, both had some bad points. Both did some good things, both did some really bad things. One side might have been slightly more in the right than the other, but they both did a lot of bad things in trying to survive in their competition to kind of seize power amongst the crew. So The Wager is like a very fascinating examination of what people do when they're thrust into extreme survival situations. So I definitely recommend The Wager by David Grann. Number 3 in my list, I have Philip and Alexander, Kings and Conquerors by Adrian Goldsworthy. I've always been fascinated by Alexander the Great. He's one of those figures in history that I've read several books about. I've always been interested in learning more about. Anytime I see a new book about him, I always pick it up and say, like, does this one look like it might have some interesting info compared to the other books I've read? Does it approach it from a different light? I think like a lot of people who are interested in the ancient history of Western civilization, Alexander's great. It's such a looming figure that it's very tempting to read as many books as you can about him. But I'll say I knew a little bit about his dad, Philip, but not a whole lot. So I saw this book and realized like half the book is dedicated to Philip and the rest is to Alexander. I was very interested to pick it up because I kind of wanted to learn about his dad, King Philip, who basically established the world that Alexander was able to inherit and made his conquest possible. It's very interesting to kind of explore both these individuals. In fact, I kind of enjoyed the Philip part more because it was something I didn't know a whole lot about, where the Alexander stuff still found very fascinating, but some of the stuff was info I've read before in other books. So, but the Philip stuff, a lot of the info was brand new info to me. So I felt like I can almost view Alexander the Great from a different light now that I know his dad's history a little bit better. So if you're interested in the history of the ancient world, if you're interested in Alexander the Great, I would highly recommend Philip and Alexander by Adrian Goldsworthy. Number 2 on my list is The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson. Erik Larson is definitely my favorite nonfiction writer, so that's probably the big reason why I struggled. Did I want to put this book at number 2 or number 1? Because I like Erik Larson so much, and he's claimed the number 1 spot on this list before in the past, and I really love this book. This book not getting number 1 has nothing to do with this book. It's just more how much I enjoyed the first book that makes the list that you'll see in a minute. But The Demon of Unrest basically explores the start of the Civil War, specifically Fort Sumter in South Carolina, and the events that were leading up to it that kind of resulted in Fort Sumter being the fuse that started the Civil War. All the individuals involved with it, from military, civilians, to political leaders in South Carolina. I guess my one small complaint, you get some from the Union side of things. I wish there'd been a little bit more examinations on that side of the debate, specifically, maybe more in the administration of the Lincoln administration as they were coming into power. You get some of that, but the majority of the focus is on the individuals in South Carolina who are supporting the Confederate cause, and then the Union soldiers actually in Fort Sumter. A very fascinating book about how the Civil War started and kind of examining like the events that led up to that, and kind of using Fort Sumter as basically a microcosm of like, this is why the situation was so broke that this war happened and could have been avoided. Really enjoyed it. There's a lot of these individuals there in this book that I weren't familiar with, even though I've read a lot about the Civil War. But Erik Larson always does a great job of not just examining like the major leaders of big events, but kind of drilling down into some like people that are like the secondary and third level of leadership. So a lot of times just gets overlooked in history, but in reality have a huge impact to how the events unfolded. And this book does a really interesting job of examining those individuals. So I really enjoyed The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson. If you enjoy Erik Larson's works in the past, I think you'll really enjoy this. If you enjoy reading about Civil War history or American history in general, I think you'll enjoy The Demon of Unrest by Erik Larson. So I definitely recommend it. And the book that claims number 1 on my list of my 5 favorite nonfiction books I read in 2025 is The Last Emperor of Mexico by Edward Shawcross. So this is a period of definitely history that I was familiar with. I knew in the mid-1800s, around the American Civil War, the French attempted to establish an allied monarchy in Mexico that was led by a Habsburg monarch. And there was briefly Emperor Maximilian ruling Mexico for a couple of years. I knew his reign didn't really last long. The Mexicans eventually overthrew him. And that's basically kind of what I knew, but I didn't know a whole lot of details, like how exactly the French got involved in trying to establish a monarchy in Mexico. Why was Maximilian selected? How did his rule actually transpire? Were all Mexicans opposed to him? Were some in favor? I didn't really know any of that stuff. This book really kind of does an amazing job of shining a lot of part of history that a lot of people kind of maybe know a little bit about it if you're a real big history nerd. I think very few people know a whole lot about it. I think most Americans specifically The only reason I'm even vaguely familiar with the events of this is a battle early on in this effort led to the holiday Cinco de Mayo, which now is a major celebration in the United States, more so than Mexico, I believe. But I think if you ask most Americans, hey, do you know this is related to a battle between the French and the Mexicans? It's like, I have no clue about that. But this book is fascinating. I really enjoyed it. The examination of all the individuals involved, from the Mexican conservatives who really wanted to establish a European monarchy in Mexico. They thought that was their way to be able to make Mexico into a great world power. The opposing faction in Mexico who favored a republic and were dead set against the monarchy being established. The various individuals in Europe who were involved in this, the ones who thought this was a great idea, the individuals who thought this was a bad idea. I mean, for example, I did not really know that Napoleon III was heavily involved in this and really was pushing this idea as a way to expand French influence around the world. I had no clue he was involved in this. I really didn't know anything about Maximilian other than he was a Habsburg monarch, but I didn't really know, like, why did he accept this offer? Why did he find this appealing? What type of ruler was he? Was he actually an effective leader and just in a bad situation? Was he a bad leader? And that's the reason why it failed so quickly. So this is a very fascinating period of history in the Western Hemisphere, and also has a heavily influenced by Europe, as I mentioned, that I think most people just don't know a whole lot about. So I would recommend, if you're looking to kind of read about an event in history that, you know, maybe it escapes most people's attentions, I would highly recommend The Last Emperor of Mexico by Edward Shawcross. I found this to be an utterly fascinating book, and I highly, highly recommend it. So those were my 5 favorite nonfiction books that I read in 2025. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comment section below, what was your favorite nonfiction book that you read in 2025? Always looking for new books to check out. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button. If you have yet, please subscribe to the channel. I appreciate the support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you the next time, and happy reading.